We're here at Build Series with the wonderful Joanna Coles, who wrote a great new book called Love Rules. And we're going to talk about it today. I'm so excited.
Good, so am I. I love seeing the cover this big, and I absolutely love this cover. It's not my thumbprint. I wish it were, but I love it.
Well, it's really, really beautiful. And, we know exactly what the book is about just by looking at this. So let's just, kick off this interview with a really lighthearted, simple question. I'm a 30-year-old who's single, hates dating. Am I going to die alone? Is that a thing?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Okay.
No, of course not, especially if you read my book. This book is designed to help people find the love that they want in their lives. And I've written it like a diet book because I realize that food and love are really very similar. We crave both of them. We have enormous appetites for both of them. We can't live without them. And actually, how you love, who you love, and who loves you back, apart from your DNA, is literally the most important thing that will guarantee you a longer and happier life. But we waste a lot of energy thinking about how much food we put into our bodies, and we waste a lot of energy on the wrong people. And I think about it in terms of emotional calories. How do you want to spend your emotional calories? And of course, we all do things that we sometimes regret. And I say in the book that hookups are a bit like French fries. They are delicious in the moment. And then the morning after you wake up and you think, why did I do that? Ugh. And you're full of dater's remorse. And so you have to be thoughtful about where you put the calories.
And, women are getting married at later rates. Women are also entering the workforce at the greatest rates. There are so many women that I encounter that are so independent, so successful, so competent in every part of their lives, and yet romance still feels somewhat befuddling. Why do you think that is, and why write this book at this particular moment in time?
Well, I think we're in a really interesting period where dating apps, which are completely brilliant if you use them properly, have changed the way we think about love. And interestingly, you almost barely hear now people talking about falling in love. You talk about people dating, you hear people talking about having met a match or swiped. You don't hear people talking about the excitement and the great passion of falling in love, and I think that's a real shame. And also the disadvantages of dating apps when you don't use them properly are to make people feel interchangeable and as if sex and love is super transactional. And actually, it's so complicated being in love, and it's so wonderful when it works. And I would hate people to miss out on that. And I secretly think it's actually what most people want. It just feels very retro to say it out loud.
So how do we get back to a place where our dating lives are actually fun, where we are prioritizing love and where we're being honest about what we want in relationships?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to get away from the notion that you can find the one and that you might find him or her, whatever your preference, just by swiping. And you absolutely have to get out from behind your computer and your phone, and you have to meet people in real life. And one of the key things that I do stress is that when you have connected with someone online, call them up. Do not waste a week, 3 weeks, a month with this crazy sort of text flirtation where you're never actually meeting in real life, because you need all 5 senses in play to figure out whether or not you even begin to find each other attractive. You cannot do it through a witty exchange online. And fun though that might be, actually what happens when you're having communication in a computer environment is that there are lots of gaps that you don't know about this stranger that you're trying to connect with. And so you tend to fill in the gaps with positive attributes that you've imagined. And when you then eventually meet them in real life, all being well, you both come to the table with very different expectations of who each other actually is. And in the book, I quote Mary Aitken, who's a brilliant cyber psychologist, and she talks about on any date that started online, there are 4 people in the date. There are the 2 real selves and then the 2 sort of social media selves. And when you actually meet, you bring all 4 to the table. So it gets very crowded, as Princess Diana said about her relationship with Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles.
Yeah, we all know, anyone who's been on an online date knows that sometimes you can get to that first date and realize, like, wow, this person is nothing like the way that they were bantering. And then suddenly you feel like you've wasted your time.
Well, one of the saddest and most common refrains I heard from men and women, but mainly women, was that they would spend, a week, 2 weeks having this great bantering text conversation. They would then arrange to meet the person, and the guy, usually the guy, would sit down, take one look at them, and say, "You know what? I think you're great. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste my time. Let's just say goodbye. I'm going now. See ya." Before even having a drink, which is crushing. And the expectations that you've arrived at in that moment are completely dashed, super disappointing. And it's also an unrealistic situation to go into in the first place. So I say in the book, don't put yourself in that situation. At the very least, have a phone call before you organise to meet someone, because you will know so much from the sound of someone's voice.
And we all know that as millennials, we're a little bit allergic to the phone.
Oh my God, millennials would rather stick heroin-laden needles in their eyes than call someone on the phone, and yet it is essential. And here's the crazy thing. The more time you communicate on the phone or on the computer and not in real life, the harder it is to communicate in real life, because this is part of your brain that needs exercising. And if you only communicate through a device, and I'm never giving my device up. I absolutely love my phone. And this is not an anti-digital book at all. It's about how do you turn digital into a tool working on your behalf? How do you have it as an arrow in your quiver? Don't make it the entire quiver.
Right. I love that you refer to dating apps as introductory tools rather than dating apps. And I think that's a really good mental switch to make. And something else that I found really interesting is that you suggest that people start what you call a love journal and write down and kind of catalog your history. Why is that kind of painstaking process important?
I think that people... One of the things that people often said to me is like, I don't understand why this is happening to me. I'm super successful at work. I've got money in the bank. Everything else in my life is together. Why isn't this? I think one of the most helpful things people can do is to keep a journal on a reasonably regular basis to track your own behavior and to jot down the feelings that you have when you have had a very flirty text exchange, or when you've had a couple of dates with people, or when things have gone wrong. Because if you keep it for over a period of time, you can track your own behavior. And I go back to the food analogy here. We all know what it's like at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when you've had what you think is a really good day. Maybe you had a yogurt for breakfast and you had a green salad for lunch, and at 4 o'clock you're like, get me to the donuts right now, because you're having a blood sugar low. And you have to understand what your trigger points are. And if you keep a journal, and we're always encouraged to keep food journals if you're trying to lose weight, if you keep a love journal, you can track your own behavior, understand your own trigger points, and avoid putting yourself in that position. So an example of that might be eating the donut at 4 o'clock could be the equivalent to sleeping with an ex. Your blood sugar's low, you're craving intimacy, you want some affection, you're feeling lonely. Who do you call? You don't call Ghostbusters, you call an ex who might be available. And then you have 45 minutes of fun. This feels good. Maybe you should rekindle it. Does his girlfriend know you're doing this now? What about your potential next boyfriend? And then you wake up the next morning and think, why did I do that? That was such a waste of energy. And if you can't clear those people out of the way, it's hard to move forward to meet new people.
Absolutely. And you also talk about defining your sexual values in the book. What do you mean by that term, and why should we be defining those sexual values?
I think what's happened among a lot of young women is they're under tremendous pressure to get naked on the first date. And this is a very unnatural state, to be naked with a stranger on your first date. So they drink a lot. We know that, especially on college campuses, binge drinking is really at epidemic proportions. It's really a bit of a public health crisis. And I think for a lot of people, alcohol has become almost their de facto consent. And so it's essential for people to understand their sexual values and to know, listen, it's fine to sleep with a stranger. It may not be great sex. And if you're actually looking for intimacy and love and someone to connect with, it's unlikely it's going to happen on your first date. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't sleep with someone. Of course not. If you want to, go ahead. But understand that this may not get you to where you actually want to be. And it might be that you get there in 10 dates or 3 months or 6 months, which is great. But great sex is about really great communication, and that's hard to do on a first night.
Yeah, and this book certainly is not anti-sex or,
No,
at all.
Totally pro. I'm pro good sex. I'm not pro bad sex. And bad sex is disappointing.
And it's such an interesting moment for this book to come out. The Me Too movement has really taken off, and we've had a lot of interesting conversations come up about that gray area of bad sex, that sex that might not be criminal, but still feels violating. How do you think this moment in time is informing our dating lives, or should be informing our dating lives?
I think it all comes back to, what do you want? You need to know what you want, and you have to be clear with the other person about what you want. And again, I go back to the incredible importance of clear communication. And if you can't talk to someone, or if you're both drunk, and I'm not saying anyone, of course, no one should take advantage of anybody when they're drunk, but the minute you start drinking, your red flags about people go down, and it accelerates the process of getting to know someone. You both become disinhibited, and that's where the danger zone is. And 50% of sexual assaults take place with alcohol. So know who you're meeting, and know who you're drinking with, and know to stay in control.
And how do you think, so-called hookup culture and porn culture has changed the way that we date or changed our sexual interactions?
I think the porn culture is super interesting, and I think that women feel that they're competing with porn a lot of the time. I talk to a lot of young women who felt they had to behave like porn stars in bed, and for everything from having to get rid of all pubic hair, and also doing things which make great porn videos but aren't so much fun in real life. And I always try to emphasize that porn sex is not real sex. They're very different. Porn sex is designed specifically to get men off within 6 to 8 minutes, and I don't think it usually takes that long. But that's what it's actually designed to do for the most part. And I think it's become our default sex education. American schools are very bad at educating kids about sex. They certainly don't educate them that it can be a pleasurable thing. They do it all from the point of view of, how not to get a disease and how not to get pregnant. So it feels like this complicated thing to do. And porn has sort of muddied the waters for women, and it makes it harder for them to express what they want and what helps them.
Yeah, and I think that sex ed also, creates such an amount of shame around communication about sex, which is another thing that you talk about, kind of having those conversations and expressing what actually is pleasurable to you, which I think as women, we're often sort of implicitly discouraged to do.
Well, women find it hard to ask for what they want. When I was the editor of Cosmo, there were 2 really common questions that cropped up all the time. How do I negotiate for a raise, and how do I have an orgasm? And weirdly, those are not questions that men ever ask.
Sometimes, it does feel like we live in a world that is kind of built around coupledom. There's such an intense pressure, especially as women get older, to not just have an amazing career, but also find that partner and settle down and have kids and do all of these things. And it makes the process of dating like unfun and kind of terrible. How do we separate ourselves from those pressures and actually begin to enjoy the process?
I think that we go about dating all wrong. We shouldn't, for the most part, go out hoping that this is going to be the one. We should approach it from the point of view of expanding your social circle, getting involved, doing more with your life. So volunteering, signing up to learn a musical instrument, joining a choir, joining a sports team, getting involved with people at work. And actually what you will find is the more you expand your social network, your actual social network in real life, the more people you meet. The more people you meet, the stronger the chance of you coming across someone that you begin to really have something in common with. And often people find each other and they've been hiding in plain sight for years. It might be colleagues working with each other. It might be the brother of your best friend. And it's often that you discover you like people because you've been doing things together. So maybe you've all gone on holiday together, or you're playing sports and you're on a team together. You see someone regularly at the gym and you figure out that you have things to share. When you meet someone exclusively for the opportunity to see if you both might be the one for each other, you're under so much pressure, it's unlikely to happen. And so I think the key is to stop looking and start enjoying your life, start expanding your life, and then it happens anyway.
I love that because I think it is so easy for first dates to feel like job interviews. Like, we're going to go through all the things I know I need to check off, and then, like, will I ever want to sleep with you? Got to decide by the end of an hour and a half.
Right, exactly right. And that's too much pressure for anybody to bear.
Absolutely. And you also include a chapter on motherhood and encourage women to be honest with themselves about what they want and plan accordingly. Why did you decide to include that chapter?
I think it's very helpful to have a reality check around what it takes to have a baby after the age of 35, 40. And we're living in a culture which is so now encouraging of women in the workplace, all of which I applaud. But I would hate it to come at the expense of women having the choice to have children if that's what they want. Because having kids is so much fun. It's hard, but it's really great. And we, discuss women's careers in terms of, oh, it's also difficult. You can't possibly have a family and work. You'll always end up juggling. You'll never do anything well. It's exhausting and you'll feel guilty. Some of which is true, but we don't discuss the joy in having children, which is really intense. And also, I think a lot of women think they can put off having children until they're 35 or 40. And we know that it's really difficult when you reach that age. The odds are against you. And the fertility industry has been very good at selling and marketing itself as a solution. But actually, it's a numbers game. And the odds are against you the older you get. And it's not easy trying to have a baby at 45 or 50. Yes, of course, people have done it. And people don't talk honestly about it. So often, older women will have babies and they won't tell you that they had it with someone else's egg. And there's no judgment on that. It's just that if you think you might want to have children, you need to address it because it's not infinite, the window to have children. And we do a disservice to young women by pretending that it is.
So how do we start having these conversations? Like, what advice do you have to young women who feel, pulled in all these different directions that you're speaking about? The direction to have a great career and effortlessly become a mother whenever and effortlessly find the one. Besides, what is like the one thing we should start doing today?
Well, I would argue with your choice of the word effortlessly. All this requires effort, right? Finding a good group of friends requires effort. And it requires sorting out the toxic friends too. The analogy to food, I think, works really well because there's junk love. There's junk food. You have to clear out the toxic stuff in your fridge. You have to get rid of the junk food. You can't keep eating it. You can have it once a week or once a month. But you need to get rid of junk people around you. And you need to put effort in to find people you want to hang out with. And you also have to turn up. You also have to show up and be a good friend. If someone's feeling ill, you have to turn up with chicken soup for them. You can't just sit there expecting the world to happen to you. And I worry that brilliant though our devices are, it's easy to turn into a spectator of other people's lives and not be a participant in your own life. And you at some point have to log off and get out there into the real world and do stuff with people.
So do you think that we have a lot more agency over our love lives than perhaps we feel we do?
I think we have a lot of agency over our love lives. It's just that people feel overwhelmed by it. And I liken dating apps to going into Costco. It's an incredible range of options, but it can feel overwhelming. So you need to head for the fresh produce aisle, because you know that the stuff in that aisle is actually the good stuff.
Snack on the good stuff. I think that's good advice for...
Well, and actually have meals on the good stuff. To go back to the analogy about food, if you snack all the time, you're never satisfied. But if you commit to eating a meal, 3 times a day with decent, nutritious food, then you'll be absolutely fine. You won't have energy dips and you'll feel cheerful.
A good dose of protein.
It's all about protein.
I think we have time for some audience questions now.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to read this book. So one thing I kind of want you to maybe touch on, if you can, is the defining the relationship talk, because I think I can speak for myself and other single women out there. You're in, a casual kind of thing, whether you're dating or having sex or whatever, and it's going great, and then once you get to the point where things start to get serious, people run the other way on both sides. And I wonder if you could just kind of talk about that or why that happens.
One of the things that happens with dating apps, and again, I think dating apps are a fantastic way of expanding your social network in all ways, and you can find all sorts of friends from them too, is that they do tantalize people with this sense of an endless smorgasbord of options. And so people have begun to do what Esther Perel, the couples therapist, calls simmering, where you have people on the back burner that you're not prepared to fully turn off, because that might mean that you're on your own, but you're not prepared to fully turn up the heat either, because there might be something better that you can put on the front burner. I think this all becomes about communication. And you said you might be having a casual relationship, you might be having sex with them or not. A lot of sex turns out not to be as casual as people think it is, and that people think they're committing themselves more than they actually might be interpreted as doing by the other person. And again, if you can't have the conversation with someone, then it's probably not, the relationship's probably not in the place that you need it to be. If you can't actually say to someone that you are sleeping with, where is this going? I really like you and I would like us to be exclusive. Or can we have a chat about exclusivity? If they're not on the same page as you, or if you can't even have the conversation, then it doesn't sound like the relationship's in a great place. You have to be able to say what you want, or at least come to some agreement about it.
Hi, I was wondering, for young millennials such as me, what's your advice for people who are trying to get out there, but they're very unsuccessful with getting a match, or having social anxiety of like talking to others in public, especially when in the real world setting, it's hard to like find the right moment to engage in conversation with someone in like any place that you're in?
I think it's practice, practice, practice. First of all, I find it very hard to believe that you're not super socially superior in situations, because you asked that question brilliantly. I think it's about joining things and doing things with people and taking the emphasis off the conversations with people. It's so much easier to have a conversation on a first date if you go to a gallery and you've got paintings hanging in front of you that you can discuss, or that you go and watch a sports game, or you go for a walk around Central Park, or you borrow somebody's dog, obviously not Central Park if you're not living in New York, but your local park, or you borrow somebody's dog, or you go and actually do something. Because then you've got something in common that you can talk about and figure out if this is someone that you'd like to see again. I think it's really hard when you just set up to meet a stranger for a drink, because you have no idea whether or not there's going to be a connection. And so I would advise you join a club, join a sports club, join a gym, join a community where you can do things with other people. And don't be looking just to meet other members of the opposite sex to go out. Look to meet loads of new people, expand your social network, and it will happen. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. And you're right to say it's difficult. It's difficult, it's stressful. Real conversations are awkward. Conversations on the phone are awkward. But if you want a real relationship, you have to keep on trying. And the more you do, the better you get at it, and the more fun it becomes, the more fulfilling, and then that sort of fulfills itself.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. So one thing that I've noticed is this kind of, and I was guilty of too, is this kind of idea of a disposability of partners. Like, there are so many options. You kind of touched on that. But society, there's like kind of a shame around the idea of settling for someone. How do we move past that?
That's a very good question. I think you know when you've met someone, and that often people are trying to talk themselves into something which they know deep down, if they're really being honest with themselves, isn't quite the right match. And I think that's where the idea of settling comes from, that people are like, yeah, he's almost right, or she's almost right. It's, but you're actually missing a connection. And I having talked to literally thousands of people at this point about this very subject, when you meet someone that you have a real connection with, you sort of know that, and that helps give you momentum to get to the next stage. And then it's easier to switch the back-burnered people off and stop simmering other people and let go. But the prospect of something better, the prospect or the fear of missing out is real. But again, I think when you have a really powerful connection with someone, you know.
So I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining us, Joanna. And everyone, go read Love Rules. It is excellent.
Thank you very much, and good luck with your own dating life. Good luck to everybody in the audience. It's the stuff of life, love, but God, is it complicated.